All right, so today we're going to look at kind of a common issue when sharing projects. More specifically, when a workstation is unable to see a project server or see the projects on that project server. So this is a pretty common case that we get at support. It could be a brand new project server that's been set up and the workstations can't see it. It could be a brand new workstation that was set up and it can't see the existing project server, or even an existing workstation that had been able to see the server and or the projects and now suddenly can't. And regardless of the specific scenario, there's still the same specific suggestions and troubleshooting tips that we're going to give you to investigate and resolve that problem. And specifically, we're going to look at the release and version numbers on both machines, uh, potentially add the server to the broadcast settings, look at any firewalls that are installed and add some exceptions to that if necessary, and also look at decom permissions on the project server and make sure those are set up correctly. So we're going to go through that today, and I'm going to approach it as kind of a troubleshooting exercise. We're going to have a project server and a workstation, and then kind of go through the steps necessary in order to get that workstation to see that project server and the projects on it, and go through all the things that we would normally suggest. Alright, so I'm going to get out of PowerPoint, and what I have is I set up a virtual project server and a user PC. And what we're going to do is we're going to start up Project Explorer on the user PC and see if we can see that project server and or the projects on it. So we'll just start up the software. We'll click on just the local sample project. Alright, so we can see the local projects. Now we'll click on the little plus sign next to network, and nothing. We don't get anything underneath network. And that's obviously where the project server should appear. So the first thing to check, and the easiest thing, is the version of the software that's installed. So if we go under the Help menu, go down to About Project Explorer, and do the same thing on the project server, we want to compare the version that's installed on both. So this says release 2019.2.1. We'll look over on the server. It says release 2019.2.1. So good. So these both match. What can often happen is, especially when installing on a workstation, is the full release will get installed, like 2019.2, but then the patch, the .1, will often get people will forget to install that. So if the workstation only has 2019.2 and the server has 2019.2.1, even if firewall exceptions and everything else is communicating correctly in the background, the server still will not appear on the workstation. And that's to protect the software and the data so that you can't try to run different versions of the software against the same project data and potentially have conflicts that might corrupt the projects. Alright, so in this case the two versions do match, so that's not the problem. So the next thing potentially is broadcast settings. So the way the software works in the background is the GGX list service is broadcasting its existence out onto the network and listening for broadcasts from other workstations and project servers. But if your network is separated up into different segments or subnets, those broadcasts don't go across onto those other subnets. So it's going to be broadcasting to the other machines around it, but if the project server is on a different subnet, those broadcasts don't make it over onto that other subnet, which isn't uncommon. A lot of companies will have their networks divided up by different floors or asset groups, or even just project servers and workstations separated. So what we have to do in that case is specifically tell this workstation either the name of the project server or the IP address of it. And we can do that here on the Broadcast tab in System Options. So by default, the Use Default Broadcast Settings is selected. We want to choose Specify Broadcast Address. And over on the right side, we either need to add the host name or the IP address. In this case, we're going to put in the host name. Let's see, PSNQJMNQ. And I'm going to make a specific mistake here, So I want to show you, if you click on add name and the host name is incorrect, it'll come up with a cannot resolve network name. Now if you had put in the correct name and it still came with that error, there could be an issue in your network environment, your DNS settings, where it's not able to actually resolve that host name. But if it's correct and you click on add name and it's able to find that machine, then you get this the name of the project server appearing in the big box on the left. So we'll say OK to that, and you'll get this message about the changes will take effect the next time you restart your computer. You don't actually have to restart, although you can. What you really just need to do is restart the 3 services that are running in the background. So there's a couple different ways to do that, but the easiest way is if you go down to the system tray, find the project manager icon, right click, and say Shutdown Discovery. So what that's going to do is it's going to close any open modules that are open on this machine, and then shut down those 3 services that are running in the background. So be careful if you do this. If you had anything in cross sections, maps, or anything like that open, to make sure that you had saved anything before clicking on that. Alright, and once those are stopped, we will basically just start the software back up. And when you start Project Explorer, if those services are not already running, it will start those 3 services first and then start Project Explorer. So you might notice starting Project Explorer might take a few seconds longer after you've shut down the services because it has to start them first, but then it will eventually open. So we'll click on sample again, let that activate, and then we'll check under network. We'll click on the little plus sign and see if we get anything. No, still blank. Alright, so we've verified the version number is the same. We've added the host name of the server to the broadcast settings. So the next thing to check would be, is there any firewall or security software installed on this machine that could be blocking those communications? So in the background, like I said, the list service is broadcasting itself out and listening for other machines to be broadcasting to it. But if there's a firewall on this machine, it's going to be stopping those broadcasts from occurring. So if there's any firewall or security software on here, we need to add in exceptions to basically tell it to ignore these programs and allow them to communicate in the background. So in this case, we're going to show you how to add exceptions to the Windows firewall. If you have any other firewall or security software in your environment, you'll need to add the exact same exceptions to it, but you will need to look up the instructions on how to do that for that particular software. Alright, so we'll get into the Windows, and I'm just going to close down some of these other windows in the background so they go away. Alright, so here we are. This is the Windows firewall, and this is where we can add in exceptions. This list here is already things that have already been added by Windows. And so we need to add in the ones specifically for the GGX services that are running in the background. So we click on Change Settings, Allow Another App, Browse, and so we need to go to the location where those programs are installed, which is Program Files x86 GVERSE, and then Tools. And the first one we'll add is GeoSync, and that's the program file for the list service that's running. We'll allow another app, and in that same directory is the program file for the network access service. That's the GGX NASRV. We'll say open, add, and then we'll add one more, and this is the program file for the database service, which is in a slightly different installation folder, bin64, and it's the dbsrv17.exe. It's the one with the little orange and white lightning bolt. So we'll say open, add, and you'll see the 3 services appear in this list. So here's the SQL Anywhere network server. That's the database service that we just added, and then you will see the GeoSync and GGX and ASRV ones. So we'll say OK to that. Make sure you always say OK on those windows. Don't say cancel, because it can sometimes undo whatever changes that you just made. And so what we'll do is if you hit refresh on Project Explorer, other machines out there should suddenly appear. So now communications are no longer being blocked, so it's receiving and sending those broadcasts. So the name of the server is this second one, PSNQ. That's the one that we actually added to the system options. So we'll click on the little plus sign next to it. Well, it doesn't seem to be expanding. So communications is occurring because we have the name of the server showing up on Project Explorer now, but we still can't get to the projects on that server. And majority of the time it's going to be a security issue, and 99.99% of the time that's going to be related to DCOM permissions. And in fact, if we right click on the server and choose properties, a little message will actually pop up and tell you that's specifically what it is. There's internal error obtaining the server interface, server firewall. Well, we've already added the exception, so that's not it. Or DCOM settings may not be set correctly to allow access. Alright, so the DCOM settings are something that needs to be done on the project server itself. So we're going to say OK to that, and we'll go ahead and close down Project Explorer. And then we're going to flip over to our project server, and we need to modify those DCOM permissions here. So there's a couple different ways you can get in there. One way is to go off of from the control panel, administrative tools, and it's the component services window. Another method is you can just run the executable directly. It's dcom cnfg, and it will run and open the same component services window. Alright, so we'll expand component services, expand computers, and the first thing we want to do is modify the properties of my computer. So we'll right click and say properties, click on the COM security, and we need to look at the limits set on both access and launch and activation. So we'll do access permissions first, click on edit limits, and in here is where you need to add in a Windows group to use to assign permissions. Now, the easiest thing is to use the group everyone, because obviously that includes everyone, so all the users on your network. If you use a specific group for your GeoGraphix users, you can use that as well. The only thing you have to make sure is whatever users need to get onto that project server are part of that specific group. So in my case, I'm just going to use the group everyone. That's the easiest. Just whatever group you use, confirm that both of the local access and remote access are checked and they're turned on as allow. So they're already set for everyone there. And we'll do edit limits for launch and activation. Use the same group everyone, and down here we need to make sure remote activation is also enabled. So launch, local activation, remote activation all need to be checked on. We'll say OK to that and OK to that. Now we need to go and expand my computer, expand DCOM config. Don't worry about if you get any of these kind of configuration warning messages, just say yes, it's just a executable or another program file that didn't get registered correctly. Scroll down until you get to GeoSync, which, if you remember, is the program that we added earlier to the exceptions list. So we want to do properties of that, because it's basically it's the list service that we're giving permissions in order to read the project home and broadcast that out to the workstations. So we're going to do security here, and by default it's set to use default with the edit grayed out. And we need to change that to customize, and then click on the edit button that's now active. And then this is where you want to add in the same group that we used earlier. So in my case, I just used everyone. If you used a specific group, like I said, make sure that you use that same one here and that the users are part of that group. And just like before, we need local launch, local activation, and remote activation checked. Say OK. Do the same thing for access permissions, customize, edit, add in the group, everyone, turn on remote access, say OK, close down all these windows. Alright, so now let's go back to the workstation, start Project Explorer again, and see what happens. We'll just activate the local sample again. And we'll look under network. And there's our server. Okay, we'll expand the server, and yay, now we see the projects. So now if we expand projects, we should see the projects within that home. And if you had more than one project home, you would see all the project homes and the projects within them. So let's go ahead and verify that we can actually activate the project. We'll just right click, say activate. Oops, now what's this? The requested project is in use by another user. The project server that manages this project has not been configured to allow concurrent access. So this is a message that you can get if for a brand new project server that was set up and the concurrent access option was not enabled. So it's not turned on by default. So when you install the software on a new project server, it's something that you specifically need to enable. So let's close the software down on here again, and we'll go down to the project server, and you enable that under the tools and system options, and it's on this first tab, the general tab. It's the middle option. I want to give multiple users concurrent access to a single project. You need to check that on and say OK. And so again, you'll get that same message that you need to restart. You don't need to restart the whole server, but you do need to restart those services. So we'll do the same thing. Right click on Project Manager, say Shutdown Discovery. And again, it's going to stop all the modules that are open and then shut down those services in the background. So do not do that unless you're absolutely sure that there are no users with projects active on that server. If there was and we did this, the services would get shut down in the server and those users would get kicked out of the server. Alright, so once they're stopped, we'll go ahead and start Project Explorer back up on the server. And like I said before, it will start those three services in the background back up first, and then open the Project Explorer window. And we'll just activate sample. Now we'll go back to the workstation and do the same thing. Open up Project Explorer. Activate the local sample project. Expand network, expand our server, expand the project home. Okay, there's sample. You can see somebody else is in it with because it has the little red check mark, which is me. I have it active on the server. So when you right click on it now and say activate, now it should actually activate because it will allow both of us to have the project enabled at the same time. And you can tell it's the active project on your machine by the little yellow arrow that appears next to it. Alright, and one more check that I'll often do after we get this far is to go ahead and open Wellbase, because Wellbase actually makes a connection to the database file for that project. So if Wellbase opens and displays your well information, that means it was able to actually make that connection to the database and pull the information back and display it. So if this comes up and shows us the well information, the sample project is blank, so it's not showing us anything. But at this point, the workstation is communicating, the project can be activated, the data can be accessed, and everything is up and running. So those are the steps that you would typically go through if you have a workstation that is unable to see a project server and or unable to see the projects that are on that server. We have white papers on our support portal for adding the exceptions for the Windows firewall, as well as configuring the DCOM permissions on the project server. So if you need those, you can find them on there. You can also always contact support, and we can either send them to you or connect with you remotely and help you make these changes as well. All right, so that's it for today.